Hello, and welcome to Poetry at the Dalí. I'm Hank Hine, the Dalí Museum Director, and it's my honor to welcome today's program. We are grateful to the city of St. Petersburg for sponsoring this program. As we know, with the new year beginning, 2022, poetry is very much needed to deal with and understand this complicated world we find ourselves in. And what better way than to begin with Helen Pruitt Wallace, the Poet Laureate of St. Petersburg, who will introduce today's poets and read, as is our tradition, one poem from her own repertoire. So welcome to Poetry at the Dalí.
Thank you so much, Hank. And thanks to all of you for tuning in as we start this new and difficult year. Difficult because who thought we would still be at this point? So here we are, but we're so very glad that you are joining us and tuning in, and we have a wonderful program for you this evening. Two terrific poets, Marianne Boruch and Earl Braggs, will be reading and then chatting with us about the craft of poetry. And as Hank said, poetry has a way of bringing all of us together in this hard time, and to whatever extent we can hang tough to the spirit of poetry, it might make it just a little bit easier. So that is our hope. And thank you, Hank, for introducing me and for being so supportive of our poetry program as we go into our 7th year, which is hard to imagine. I will read one poem, and I'm going to read a poem that is a pandemic poem to start us off for this year. It's one I actually had an earlier version of back when I thought we might be a little shorter lived with this problem. So I have expanded it in the same way maybe that the months have expanded during which we're dealing with this. This is a poem written in a form called a ghazal. For those of you tuning in who may not know, it's written in long length couplets, and you will hear the repetition of the last 2 words of the second line in each couplet over and over again, all the way through the poem. It's a Persian form in origin. So this is called Ghazal for the Vanishing Handshake, Once We Venture Out. Now that we can, or almost, until we can't, we stumble like wax wings drunk on red berries and light, our hands flummoxed mid-air. What gestures can we offer each other if not through the warmth of our hands? Each day is a pocket with a hole. The loose hours fall through what can't be held. By evening, I've lost myself. Even our hands feel gagged. A backpack you pass on a bench sours for days in rain. Whatever sorrows it holds, we can't touch them with our hands. Can you remember the salty smell of skin, that power of longing leaning closer? What's stronger than the language of our hands? Or maybe it's only what they translate. Touch, a mother tongue the whole world craves, that constant humming through our hands. Listen, a bird's distant song. Who am I to let myself go missing? Our fig tree drops leaves when it needs water. Our hands fall to our sides. But look, each one still has 5 fingers, and veins flush the cells that feed the splintered lifelines of our hands. Why keep them like trapped birds in our pockets, walled as we are 6 feet apart? Can we measure space by heart and not our hands? Here is the church and here is the steeple. Open the doors and see a backpack, bird, brittle leaves. All of it feels out of our hands. Okay, thank you. Thank you, and it is my true pleasure to welcome Marianne and Earl here tonight. We're going to start off with Earl Braggs, reading for us. And Earl is a UC Foundation and Battle Professor of English at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. Earl Sherman Braggs is the author of 14 collections of poetry and a memoir, A Boy Named Boy. His poetry prizes include the Anhinga Prize and the Jack Kerouac International Literary Prize. His latest poetry collections are Obama's Children, published by Madville Press in 2020, Hat Dancing Blue with Miss Bessie Smith, published by Yellow Jacket Press, Negro Side of the Moon, C&R Press, and Cruising Weather WindBlue through Anhinga Press. And I mentioned to Earl that I had the pleasure back when I was a grad student at FSU of, and I was doing some readings for Anhinga. I had the pleasure of seeing one of his early books come through, and loved his work back then. And I'm so happy to have him here with us this evening. Earl, welcome.
Thank you. I thought for this reading, I would start with the Anhinga Prize-winning book of my first full collection, Hat Dancer Blue. And then I'll go to my latest book and read a poem, and then fill in between as we go along. But before I get started, my wife and I were in Spain probably 10 years ago, and we were in this place called Caracas, and it was 9 kilometers from where Salvador Dalí was born. And we went to a Subway shop, and on the menu, there was a Salvador Dalí sub. So I thought this would be an appropriate time to tell that. Anyway, I'll start with a poem called I'll Be Calling You Out Tonight. Be calling you up tonight. It's a divorce poem. Standing here smoking my 70-second cigarette in 23 hours, staring into the face of every woman who passes, I think perhaps I should apologize. Looking for you in their fleeting eyes, I know I won't. The night air down here is cool avenue blue. Looking up, I can only imagine you standing there by the light of your window, 35 stories above this street level man you loved those 12 years. There's a full moon out tonight, so maybe I will cross this street of mad traffic blues into our small town and find us racing across perfect cornfields. You in shorts, your brother's shirt, years too big, and me in raggedy jeans. That was the year of the merry-go carnival, with the bag-leg circus clowns smiling purple smeared smiles. I loved you more than that 57 Chevy Tommy left when he went off to war. So many years have passed, and we pushed the memories into the Goodwill corners of some forgotten woman's blue room, like unwanted toys we've outgrown. So many years have passed, and we pushed the memories again. Remember that diamond ring I stole for $17, and how we laughed and laughed and laughed when it turned your finger green? And yes, the children are almost grown now. Yesterday, the circus came to town, and I dreamed I was the blue wind that stole your lover man's hat. But it didn't fit the way it did when I was a kid, 17, awkward, wearing my father's shoes. Tonight, I'm wearing a faded Yankee blue baseball cap and an overcoat. My collar is turned up tight to fight the night wind that's trying to steal my mind. And yes, my dear Angelina, I know you won't answer, but I'll be calling you from this dusty blue street corner phone that smiles at everyone passing as it eats my last quarters without saying, thank you for using AT&T, in the voice of a sweet woman. This next poem is from Obama's Children. This is my latest book. Obama's children are the children that turned came of age during the 8 years of the Obama administration. And we kind of first got introduced to these kids after the Stoneman Douglas school shooting. And they quickly put together a protest and went to Washington, D.C. and spoke directly to us. And they were kind of reminiscent of the children of the 60s as far as being politically active. So this is a persona poem from the collection Obama's Children. It kind of combines a number of the school shootings, but this is written from the point of view of high school students. And then one day, a field of Colorado blue columbine flowers wilted into never. What once was a picture-perfect school picture-taking day angled into something without a name. No contrast, no vision, a photocopy of school colors, school uniforms, of dress-coded labels we've since been instructed to iron before washing. We don't know why, but why knows the spelling of each of our names. Newsday grief is so brief these days, and it should come as no surprise. We are surprised that we live one day after the next. Teachers and principals beyond expended explaining what they cannot explain. In plain view, a red fox hides her cubs in white Colorado snow. It is not safe to say that we would rather not remember our dreams. We count our blessings by not counting the spaces between empty chairs. We ride school buses into the yellow haze of school morning days. No front door welcome mat, no classroom, homeroom to speak not of. Love, two consonants, two vowels, erased into something resenting, like a yellow number 2 pencil. Textbooks check out the danger of opening the wrong page. Library books check us out as if they think we know more than they. Hallway lockers all slam sad. We dream in inverted question marks. First period this morning reached down to grab me, grabbed instead my backpack, as if a metal detector can detect or not. Last night, I completely finished reading A Midnight Summer Dream. Days in, days out, quick as they are slow, we never know what is which. I know you think I should be, but I'm not afraid. It's something more. I know you think I should be despaired, but I'm not. It's something more, something heavier than the weight of waiting for the other something to drop, heavier than the gravity of trying to forget the names of places where crosshairs cross out children. I've never been an A student. I often question a B, but I've always turned in my homework on time. But time these days seem not to care. Nowadays, we get full credit for anything and everything by just showing up the day after the latest network news. Baby sister 14 and her baby brother killed yesterday in Parkland, Newtown, Connecticut. A terrible ear it takes to want to hear nothing more than more gun music. Armed elementary school teachers, some stupid gun music playing politician reportedly said. Dead, can he not see us walking almost already? Can he not spell his own children's name? Can he not see clearly what we see? Little school children, less than 3.5 feet tall, first grade, first day of school, standing, pledging allegiance to a roll call book that knows the spelling of each, their names. I volunteered to go to Vietnam, but I was give you an indication of how stupid, naive, or whatever I was when I was 19. But I wasn't sent, but a lot of my friends were, and so I write a lot of Vietnam poems just to kind of pay homage to people that did go to Vietnam. I have a stage and voice, and so I speak for them sometimes. This poem was well, I read The Things They Carried, and I just fell in love with that book. It was many, many years ago, and I decided I wrote this poem in for Tim O'Brien. It's called The Things They Carried. Crisco died with his soldier in his hand. That's right. He was taking a piss, and Charlie picked him off long distance. The morning was one of those mornings when everyone felt safe as we could feel in the bush. It was a scene perhaps from a war movie, the year of our Lord, 1969. Neil Armstrong was still walking on the moon. We were walking towards daybreak, a platoon of 18 boys in loose rank. The report we got said the area ain't hot. So we relaxed and walked slow and talked low about girls back home. Crisco's girl was Susan, a buxom blonde. He said he met somewhere in California. Said she was prettier than the picture he carried like a god in his army shirt pocket. Said they were going to be married when his tour was over. It was a good day to be outside. There was a breeze, nice and cool and easy as a Sunday morning low country South Carolina breeze. We were stepping in from the shade into the bright sunlight. We just smoked a joint, shoelaced with heroin. We were floating on seasick waves. The horse was starting to kick. We were not paying attention. The birds were singing. The air smelled fresh. The sky was chamber music and was clear. It was not a morning for war movies. We were walking in loose rank and laughing and talking about girls back home. We were drifting. It wasn't stovetop hot. There was a breeze, nice and cool and easy. The banyan trees were movie props, a Hollywood of slow dancing leaves. The joint was good. That white horse was kicking. We were not paying attention. We were joking and talking about girls back home. Crisco was going to be married. The sky was chamber music and was clear. The birds were singing. It wasn't hot. There was a breeze. It was a good day for a white wedding, and all the best men were standing right there watching the rice of unbleached rain fall. And I think I have time for one more. This poem is called Miles Davis Plays Trumpet at the Funeral of Malcolm X. I could begin by telling you he rode two horses at once without falling off, only to fall between the dark street night legs of the Nation of Islam. I could tell you that this is Harlem, 1965, and Malcolm is still standing there next to that dining room window, peeking out through a rifle and a scope, looking into the face of no visible hope. I could tell you a lot of things. I could tell you a lot of stuff, but I won't. What I'll tell you is this. Today is Sunday. Sunday is nigger fried chicken day. Sunday is movie day in the Folsom County prison. We're sitting here. We're watching a John Wayne picture show in slow motion black and white, 16 millimeters. Outside, it's freeze raining crows. I cannot describe the fear in a cup of coffee too black to drink, spilling onto my lap, spilling onto the front page of every newspaper locked in newspaper boxes on every street corner in the United States of America. Here's a dime for 10 slanted pages. I know it as it was. Malcolm was standing on a stage in Harlem. Then Malcolm X fell. Then Malcolm X bled. Then Malcolm X died like a dog in the road. That's all. Now he's no more than an Alex Haley comic book Superman. Look at me, I'm a comic laugh. It's a funny thing. How things happen just like in the movies, just like James Dean, just like Steve McQueen, just like Errol Flynn, just like Tyrone, just like me. I've been locked up here in this prison 3 years, 17 days, and 9 hours. Sometimes at night, I turn out the lights and dream backwards between bars and stripes and stars, always movie stars. But this ain't no movie house popcorn picture show sticking to the floor. It's blood that makes a wedding rose red enough to decorate the dead. Believe it or not, yes, that's what I said. Outside, the rain has stopped. But the crows are not gone. They're hovering over the kill. The fried chicken is gone. What did you expect? Are you surprised? I am not. It's hot in here. The movie is now over, and yes, John Wayne got the girl, as he always does. Did you think he wouldn't? I didn't. Drinking cold coffee, smoking my cigarettes down to the very end. I'm the only one left, sitting here in the middle of a sold-out show, sweating, staring at Minister Malcolm laid out in the stately manner of royalty. Somewhere, somehow, some way, a trumpet begins to blow, softly at first, then slow. I turn to see the image of a man blacker than me, leaning back into the corner, blacker than he. Miles Dewey Davis is laying down on top of, someday, my prince will come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was a terrific and very powerful reading, Earl. And it's just so interesting for me to have known you when you were working on your first book, or at least known you through your words. And here you are, 13 books after that one. It's an honor to have you read for us in the Dalí Poetry Series. Thank you for that good reading.
Thank you.
Next, we have the pleasure of hearing Marianne Boruch read her terrific poems. And I have been a fan of yours for many years and have read read your work and have hoped to learn from your work and still do. So Marianne's 11 books of poetry include Bestiary Dark, published by Copper Canyon in 2021, triggered by her 2019 Fulbright in Australia, observing its astonishing wildlife. Her prose, 3 essay collections, recently The Little Death of Self, Michigan's Poet on Poetry series, and a memoir, The Glimpse Traveler, Indiana, 2011. Among her honors, the Kingsley-Tufts Award for the Book of Hours, a Guggenheim, 2 NEAs, and residencies at the Rockefeller Bellagio Center, and 2 national parks, Denali and Isle Royale. I look forward to hearing about those, especially Denali, if you're up for talking about that, Marianne. Her work appears in the American Poetry Review, Poetry, The New Yorker, and elsewhere. After 33 years of teaching at Purdue, Boruch went rogue and emeritus in 2018. Since 1988, she's continued to be on the faculty of the MFA program for the writers at Warren Wilson College. In spring 2022, she will be the Jennifer Jahrling Forese Writer in Residence at Colby College in Waterville, Maine. Please welcome Marianne Boruch. Thank you for being here, Marianne.
Wow, well, thank you. Helen. I want to thank the Dalí Museum, Danny Wallace, Hank, Helen, Joy, and I'm especially pleased to be reading with Earl today because, he's a wonderful writer, and that was just a dynamite reading he just gave. So thank you, Earl. It was terrific. I'm gonna let's see. I'm gonna begin actually with the book before Bestiary Dark, and just read one poem from it, the beginning poem from that. This is from the book, The Anti-Grave. It's called Pieces on the Ground. I gave up the pencil, the walk in woods, the fog at dawn, a keyhole I lost an eye to. In the habit of early, of acorn into oak, bent, tangled, choked because of ache or greed, or lousy light deemed it so. So what? Give up that so what? Oh, fellow addicts of the arch and the tragic, give up the 1,000-pound if and when too. Give up whatever made the bed or unmade it. Give up the no thing that shatters into other things and takes the remember fork in the road. The remember isn't a road. At noon, the fog has no memory of fog. The trees I walked or wanted to, like the pencil, never recalls its least little mark. The dash loved, the comma that cannot dig down what its own brief nothing means on the page. I don't understand death either. By afternoon, the brain is a box, is breath let go, a kind of mood music agog, half emptied by the usual, who am I, who are you, who's anyone? Truth is, I listen all night for morning, all day for night, in the trees draped like a sound I never quite get how it goes. There's a phantom self, nerved up as any missing arm or leg. Of course I was. Of course I stared from the yard, my mother at the window, rinsing knife and spoon in the middle of her life. In drawing class, all eyes fix on the figure gone imaginary, thinning to paper. Not the wind or a cry, how the hand makes our bent to it. Pause and rush, pause and rush. Small animals heard only at night, spooked in the leaves. Okay, I'm going to read a few poems from Bestiary Dark, this new book that just came out in October. As Helen said, I had a Fulbright to Australia, and it was in 2019 before the fires started. They started just as we left. and I began to write the poems at home. And of course, before COVID, so our timing was quite good, I guess. I'm going to just read around in this book, and I'll pause between the poems, and anyway, I should keep track of this time. Okay. So the first line of these poems is also the title of the pieces. I could redact most parts of me so memory can't even reach them. I could, and really once in Tasmania, it was, "You guys, nearly off the map," our son wrote, half mistaken amaze, as old cartographers in love with vast, with a lot of water around something, inking a three-headed dragon to the corner. Most didn't much leave their rooms. Any nearly equals beginning. Leave it to a map to unmap. Oh, cloud of close your eyes. Hang on, said the sweet, earnest boy, secretly writing his novel, selling us a printer at Office Works in Canberra to over and over, the way myth works, any real story come along. Real story. A fire about to be triggered by ghost gums and lightning, or floods that overwhelm, or such beautiful days. I understand, I said to the indigenous elder. No, you don't, he said. Of course, Pliny got here with this bestiary thing. World turn CE 2 years pre-Pompeii, his collecting, recollecting every blur and fine point. It's how you watch birds from a blind. You see and they don't. The pond shrunk by drought. Is the poem a telescope or a microscope? Is it big to make small or small to make big? How much water in a poem divided by how much thirst? How much fire and ash? A time machine can destroy or cherish. And that rib toward a future, was it a fuse? Orphan wallaroo in my arms, kind of baby kangaroo, not really. One species here, one species there, but they resemble. Added in that slough of despond called room, called rescue center. The little wallaroo I bottle fed, filling the word pensive as stare, as stop eating a moment. I see it, saw it, I do. Surely his, where is she? Headlight blinded at dusk, fooled by glare. His mother crossing for grass in a small welling up what once was a pond. The driver, Jesus, where the hell? Bent for a shiny can rolling near the brake. Bottle half the length of my hand in my hand. His paws and giant legs all akimbo in the flannel pouch. His human eyes, not quite fear, but warm at that speed, meant milk mixed from a tin. The bottle with its long tawny nipple, his mouth frantic as any infant's for it. So we get there, just as some asshole, forgive me, on a joyride in the outback, runs her down the emu and keeps going. After all, he's got a planet to desecrate. A very long line of feathered bloody something she's lifting now and falling back to the road, not exactly an ostrich, but as lordly and slower each time. Don't fool yourself. It wasn't wind, not a broken hinge crying out to open a door. Our worthless offerings. Oh, emu, here's our numb speechlessness. But there are those who drive to, who cares if I kill, and never regret. We willed that news to her, medieval as prayer, all abruptly stricken in the Flinders, the hand-wringing two of us. There's another acolyte stepped from his truck with a huge plumber's wrench to bash her kindly. A good 1, 2, 3. Her each time fainter. Oh, on a loop. Reader, you who think poems should never story too much or render news of the day, I need to get this right. Grief is human speak for emu. Night's quiet since then. What doesn't define want? The spider's hope for the sawtooth circle she reels out, those spit threads she wheedles straight, wind billows but does not break. How much sunlight loves a window too? How much the garden does not care how much it grows, weary of growing. All night the moon hangs its melodrama there. He hides under a bed, old cat too old to recognize mouse, or moth lost to wool. He hides from a crack of thunder that where the sound of that insistent, sudden something in woods at night, abrupt, you turn like prey. In the reserve, I cleavered down hard to bite-size the carrots, silver beets, sweet potatoes, for wallabies endangered, fed in the sanctuary, i.e. a sacred place. I earned a blood blister for my trouble. Every time I looked at my hand, every time I looked at my hand. Emu, you woke up. I did, or I do, or I am, or I almost. What about those two hand-wringing ringers who dragged you off the road? The Americans? I heard the numb knot in their heads trying to untie itself. Emu, what about that killer savior of the heaviest wrench, stopping his truck, smashing you to grit, godforsaken, once, twice, 3 times, to his, I'm sorry. That bastard of love. My inner eyelid, the second one that opened sideways, I lay there and saw what I saw. And the murderous driver? All exhaust and cutthroat fumes be his. Where are you now, Emu? Exactly where you are, in the italics. Even before the great burning, what of endangered koalas sleeping through it all in eucalyptus trees, in the sanctuary, therefore sanctified? Koalas stink, and in drought. A New Zealander flat out told me, can you trust a Kiwi in Australia, an Aussie in New Zealand? Too little water up there through roots into leaves, which is all they eat or drink. Worse, consider the fires burning to ash 1 meter down, microbes that should offer all things to those koalas straight out of earth via trees. So the forester held forth. If indigenous, he was not, he'd say country, like it's the beginning of time, like it's a thing. Even you could come back as dirt, the indigenous elder told me. Even you could get lucky. A most triumphant, reverent re-up, dirt, all giving link in the chain. Koalas are cute, the archangel said, but their dreams scare me. Merely human, I ran out of neck to bend back, tops of trees lost in that eucalyptus grove. Just once I spotted a koala high in, was it a scribble gum? Still, who was I to those giants? Couldn't gauge how distant that leafing out was. To know something, though, a furry small something, his back to me, his ass to me, to be sweetly exact. To see other life living this life. As for the scribble gum, its name means larvae encrypting a feeding trail between old bark and new, raised marks as brilliant as Braille. I mean to say, says the tiniest, not yet moth, want out, want out, want out. It's like this, I told the archangel, who can't swim. Crazy, crowded, under great waters, 2 hours from shore. So misleading, a dull, vast gray, not even blue if you look from the boat. A full nothing really, except you could say notable ships with questionable, if not despicable captains, dissolved a century and decades ago. Also the unfamous, lost too, who knows where, plus storms, of course storms. A terrible reverie kicks in, wind, the stopped motor, as they laid out tea, little cups of little cakes, the earnest young marine biologists, charts and maps, all possible, the possible end of it all. Be careful, heating more and more down there, month after month, rolling, therefore queasy, but instantly, as one goggles up, drops and snorkels in. Oh my God, everyone here, all along, in full color. Lucky the boat found suspended over, down and down, clownfish, orange and white, gobbies, tiny blazing yellow, the thick-lipped speckled wasps, damselfish, triggerfish, blue is the deepest bruise. There's a movie, black and white to sudden every color. You know it, you do. You grew up with it. As if longing is belonging, she closes her eyes. She recites like a schoolgirl, her antipantic device set to go off. Even now, this century, there's no place like, out of straw, a brain then, and echoing. Emptiness morphs to a heart, fear, to a great fear remembered, thus muffled by the gleaming metal equals courage. Christ, so much is hard to believe. It gets harder. The simple point, great waters of the reef go silent when there's bad news. Coral, fewer and fewer, but it's fine, a sign, triumphantly ordinary fine, when creatures still noise up, click and whine and crack, open and shut. In such a spot we fanned out our drift and drag, swimming, how and why, skimming, mountains, valleys deeper than lost fabled cities, hundreds, all matter, thousands, graceful creatures, finned, clawed and aglow, unimagining who they are. No thanks to our dead language names for them, a curtain pulled back to their just here thing. Beloved, certain neighborhoods over time, relished, remembered, a real racket down there, eating, mating, fighting, forgetting where they put their glasses and keys. See, you are paying attention. How tiniest fish for a home in the reef need to listen. They listen to swim, find that hidey hole. So much still gorgeous, except places of die off, quiet gray out, too warm for the brilliant, waving, living, all of them, we swimmers, mere shadows falling, part of that dark that keeps dropping. I learned to read any color as light. I told the archangel, who didn't buy that either, light as schools of moving light. Every corner we turned, such blues and yellows, dappled, striped, though that yes and yes, no corners. The heart is heavy, but not with blood or sorrow yet. It's the trouble gene, 5 times what it should weigh as we walk around. Pierced as hearts I remember from school that showed up sweet or gruesome on those bad art holy cards. Bodies split open. Even the classic doe-eyed Christ, staring above, little knives, little arrows flailing every which way. His 4 chambers, if triaged, however sacred, straight to the hopeless last third, and emergencies, far corner. Some perfectly resourceful creatures don't have hearts. The stinging jellyfish, delicate as a wedding veil or gauze, the ambulance tech winds round and round the wound, has no heart. In the Great Barrier Reef, in real sponges too, nada. The highest number, 3, what the octopus needs to slip through an aquarium filter down drainage, certain a great sea at the end of it. The winner on land, once the huge Barosaurus, fed his tiny brain with blood, 8 hearts to manage all the rush and lie back, working like the legislature of a small corrupt republic, his world to be erased by a meteor. For the koala, the heart must be so unhurried. They sleep most of the day and night high in eucalyptus trees with nutritious, most flammable leaves. I wasn't thinking fire then, or heart for that matter, as I watched them be a wonder up there. Heavy, heaviest is retrospect. At Pool's Edge, the skinniest man alive, probably the oldest I'll ever see. He takes a step to the young therapist's chair. Let's boogie. I expect her to say pops, as in a movie from the 50s. I expect a lot of things that never happen. Like a fall, a crash to the floor if you have legs like that. 2 sticks, a kid's drawing of legs. Something I suspect he'd never predict for himself in the days of muscle and bravado. I can tell you feral goats get thin as that in the outback, or the sheep ghost crowding the one sealed road that circles half a continent and threads down past Uluru. We'd come upon them stopped to stop us, though of course we figured they figured we had nothing to do with their craving plain water, pure and not so simple to find in drought. They stared straight into us, into our impatience, our old impatience. What about that? So what about that? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Hearing you read those poems, I was thinking about some of the ways in which your work overlaps with Earl, and I was thinking about the word enact, because in both of your several of your poems, for both of you, I'm feeling like I'm suddenly put into the place of the poem, and it feels as if you're not just reading to me. The poem is actually sort of enacting itself, if you will. And I think in a few minutes when we get to the Q&A, I'd like to have you both, if you will, talk a little bit about that for me. First, I do want to do a shout out to Danny Lawless. Danny is the one who reached out on behalf of the museum to Marianne and helped us get your contact information. And Danny Lawless, as many of you listening probably know, is the editor of Plume, which is the terrific journal. And we have collaborated with the Dalí Museum has collaborated with Danny on many other occasions to get our readers and our poets. So thank you again, Danny, for that. And we look forward to having Danny back for another reading at some point in the near future. And he and I have discussed also putting him on a panel with editors, a couple of other editors, to talk not only give a reading, but to talk about the editing of a poetry journal. So stay tuned for that down the road. But again, Marianne, thank you for that reading. We're going to segue now into the Q&A. So everybody will be on the screen, and I'd like to start off, if you will, both talk a little bit about how we do that. How do we help our poems enact? How do our poems enact their subject matter rather than just being, caught in a sort of web of just straight up description? I've been listening a little bit to a podcast from the New Yorker with Kevin Young, and the reason that word enact kind of resonated for me with your poems, I think, is because he often talks about that as being one of the characteristics of a good poem. A good poem enacts its subject matter. So would each of you talk about that a little bit? And, correct me if I'm wrong, but if that is something that you aspire to in your own poems, can you talk about how you do that? How do we get our poems to enact the subject matter?
Well, I guess I will start. It's not a conscious thing for me. I am very in tune to the theatrics of a play. And while so many of my colleagues read poetry, and I'm not saying I don't read poetry, but I read a lot of plays. And I identify with Beckett and Tennessee Williams and August Wilson, on and on and on, how they present and pull you into whatever is being talked about. Mm-hmm. And so I guess subconsciously I try to do the same thing with my poetry. Mm-hmm. According to you, it works sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Marianne.
Yeah, I mean that's a wonderful kind of segue, Earl, into in the playwriting or plays and the notion of the immediate thing on the stage, right? An immediacy that we want in poems, even when we're remembering things. I mean, I feel like that happens because, I mean, at least in my case, it's not like, I have some pre-digested idea for the poem or how it was going to end or anything like that. I mean, it's true in that first emu poem, I'm recounting an actual incident that we witnessed. But so I had this thing to write about, and that was very specific. But even that poem, I think the biggest thing is, I think, to not know where you're going. To go in kind of blind. You begin with an image that fascinates you, and then you kind of give it away to the poem, and then the poem kind of does its thing, and of course I revise like crazy too, but I love that process of re-seeing and kind of figuring out what the poem is really trying to do, which takes a while, actually. Mm-hmm. But I think that idea of being sort of a little stupid and going blank, and I call it putting out my begging bowl and hoping an image drops in of some sort. And then I move from that to where I have no idea. And that, I think that's part of the scary pleasure of it is watching it unfold so that it becomes a separate creature. It's not just me Xeroxing my guts or, telling how I spent my summer vacation or something. And also the poem, I think, has to have a kind of little surprise in it. Like, Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader, no tears in the writer, no tears for the reader. So that sense of however external the poem is, and it has to be to actually be on the page, stuff, that we're writing about, real things, and not just, some kind of weird abstract something or other. But still, at some point, it has to go interior. It has to be, there's has to unlock a little door, then we go dive down into this place we can't even imagine that we end up. And then perhaps come out of it, perhaps not. But I mean, this not idea of like the public and the private elements combined. I think that's important. But I know I lose all track of time when I'm writing. If it's working well, like it's like I have no body, I have no history, I have no gender, race, anything, any of these categories that seem to me to be given by the world in a way, but whatever we're writing from is deeper than that. I guess it's a kind of spiritual discipline, really. But and of course we're drawing on all those things, which is our experience. But and we have to fill the poem up with that. I mean, I was really touched, Earl, in your poems about the great empathy in the poems, and how you move from that, and then the poem, the work that you do with, the Vietnam War, even though you weren't there, but you had friends who were there and you heard the stories, and you mentioned Tim O'Brien's wonderful book. But I don't know, that was very moving to me. And so the no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader really came through with that. And I just, so that's an element too. And I guess that's an interior element in the poem. And now I've gone on too long, so sorry.
No, not at all. And that's exactly, those were the poems I was thinking of that Earl read, with the Vietnam poems especially. They seem to really enact for me as a listener. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I'm glad you mentioned the word imagery, because it does seem to me that is maybe at least one important way of enacting a poem is through the imagery of the poem. But there are probably other ways, and that I'd still like to talk about. Hank, would you like to add to this? Right.
In a related,
like to add to that? Yeah.
In a related perspective, there seems in both those poems, which have been taken now as exemplary of that enactment, the poem of the emu and that experience, and the poem of the soldier, what the reader hears first as bare fact becomes almost, if I can use the metaphor of painting, becomes like a cubist tableau, the sense that Cubism wanted to take its subject and look at it from different perspectives. Yeah. So there wasn't a single perspective. There's a kind of, if you imagine a lens, it circles the room and sees the subject from all these different perspectives. And in so doing, creates a new reality. And I think that's what I was struck with, and how I'm wondering if for you as poets, having confronted a simple narrative, a simple fact in this world, something raw and violent and not lyrical, do you find that the creation of that circling lens of looking at it from different perspectives, almost creating a kind of song of the narrative, does change your relation to the subject in your memory? Is it a kind of permanent substitution of the initial experience? It was for me listening to it. I heard the plain facts. I heard the guy picked off when they're high in the jungle. I heard the brutality of the thoughtlessness of human beings in relation to this really interesting animal. And then it informed a new vision of the whole experience. And I wouldn't look back at it the same way as the first few stanzas. When I try to remember what you are talking about, I see it differently now. And I'm wondering if it is for you as well, or whether you've created an artifact that you can step away from and see perhaps in memory in a different way?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, Hank. I love that. What do you guys think about that?
Go ahead, Hank.
If I understood what you were saying correctly, Hank, that changed perspective, because what may have started with some facts to kind of lay out the poem goes so many different and surprising directions. It's multi-layered, but both poems for both poets, the Vietnam poems as well as the poem about the emu, they took off in some directions that I did not expect. And so I would answer, absolutely, my perspective from hearing those multiple layers. And I believe, Marianne, you used the word doors, the different doors in poems. I mean, it's like when I was listening to you read the poem about the emu, you went through a lot of different doors that I wouldn't necessarily have anticipated. And doing that, it did sort of change my perspective of what I thought the poem was maybe going to be about. Hank, if I'm answering your question correctly. But what do you guys think about that sort of multi-layering of poem that takes you different places, in response to Hank's comment?
Well, no, when I said go ahead, Hank, I meant like, yeah, I mean, that is a wonderful way to see it. I've never heard Cubism defined that way, but now that forever will change my view of Cubism painting. Anyway, thanks for that. Of course, I'm interested what Earl has to say to this, but
I understand that the Cubists didn't even know what it meant. But anyway, am I unmuted?
You're good. I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Some people call it like being ignorant or being stupid, but I just call it just being in the kind of unknown and accepting that unknown and improvisation, just moving through it, because you never know where the magic is going to come in.
Right.
When you're writing. And we talked about surprise. And when you're writing, oftentimes, at least I'm surprised. And then many times I go back and I'll read something I wrote years and years ago, and I'll ask myself, did I write that? And it takes me to what Quincy Troop said. He said that writers are just conduits for the spirit to flow through. You know, so whatever's on the page, it just came through me, and it was fashioned in a certain way by me, but it didn't necessarily come from me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That is wonderfully put. And I think, I really hate poems with agendas, really clear agendas. Like it's already been, figured out beforehand. And I'm thinking, what's the point of that? Because it is that idea of surprise, obviously, but it's also that notion of being receptive. I think you suggest that, Earl, but that notion of just being ready to be, to receive whatever it is. And then and I think that's really the sweet thing, that kind of attentiveness. So it's not, I said stupid, but what I meant, I guess, was just going blank enough to let that happen and not have an agenda, for it.
So Marianne, taking that word agenda as a bad thing, I wonder if, though, that we don't as writers have an agenda to understand experience, which in itself is not understandable. It's just the rain of, sense on the matter of our eyes and brains.
Well, yeah,
but something else. And can't that be our agenda as writers?
Well, I think we're guided by what we're haunted by. that's what, and that's the thing that falls in the begging bowl, right? The thing that we can't get rid of, that we're haunted. Like I was really haunted by that experience with the emu.
Clearly, yeah.
And but it really surprised me that the emu comes back 3 times in the book from the dead to speak. And so I just read the first time that she does that. But it's like and I think we felt that, Earl, in your poem about being haunted by the war, which those of us who lived through that, we were young people then. I mean, that was just a huge thing, as we oldies all know. But however you felt about the war, it was still, the war, and full of violence and grief and everything else. So, but yeah, I mean, this is wonderful. I think training yourself is untraining yourself in a way as a writer, to just be ready, and then the surprise happens too in the revision, where you kind of start figuring out. I mean, I know Ellen Bryant Voigt has said that we stop too early because we're good poets. We know how to make a poem that looks like a poem. It barks like a dog, but maybe it's not really a dog, So we can make it all kind of pretty and end up and sound kind of profound or whatever, but maybe there's something deeper there. And what I do, what I call my hospital rounds, where I have just piles of poems kind of in various states of undress. And I just go through them every day and see, and just kind of visit with them, and then sometimes I'll suddenly see something, because you can't see everything at once, right? So, and so it's like visiting a friend in a coma in the hospital, and just sitting by the bed and kind of waiting for them to rise up and speak or something. And so, and sometimes they do, and sometimes I just kind of, okay, that's fine, pass it over. It's just like I'm spending time with them, just as almost an equal. So they're looking back at me, and that's the point. You want to look back at you as a separate creature. But and that's very exciting, I think. But anyway,
I really love that, because, and actually you anticipated the question I was going to ask next, which is part of this. What happens when we write poems that we can tell we're keeping on too short a leash? We need to let them off the leash to go somewhere else. I was curious about, what you might suggest, both of you, all three of you, for ways to get back into the poems. And so I love what you just said, that you just go back to your stack and visit with each of them, like hospital bed. That's really wonderful. Sometimes, when I'm looking at a poem, I have an idea that something's not working, and I'll circle something, but I'm not quite sure what it is that's not working. I know Richard Hugo, from his book, The Triggering Town, suggests when you come to a place in a poem and you think something's not quite right, chances are the problem is actually up a little bit sooner. So don't focus just right there. Look a little bit ahead, and you might find actually where the problem is. But that idea of just visiting with them to try to get at what isn't quite working is such a, I love that. I know sometimes I'll get to a place and I'll feel like, to open the poem back up, I need to do some sort of invention work, clustering or brainstorming or something, to try to take it a little bit out of the narrative and see where it might go, to try to get at some sort of surprise. But I don't know, I'm always interested in how what other poets use to open their poems back up when they feel like they need to be. So
yeah, it's just time on the wheel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, of course, unless you're a genius, and then boom, it comes out, right?
Yeah.
I think the key is revision. I mean, I love revising my poems, and
yeah, me too.
My wife tells me that I just revise them out of being a poem. So I have to kind of pull it back,
Over revising.
And I start to revise.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I think that your attitude about revision, if it's a healthy attitude, it will cause you to find those things and find those places that the poem needs to go, and the things that the poem needs to say.
Yeah. And then finding that balance too between saying enough, exploring the layers, going down those doors. So you're allowing enough mystery, but also allowing the readers to get their footing every now and then. There's those, for me anyway, sometimes the balancing of that can be tricky. How do we allow for more mystery in our poems while not becoming so obscure that we run the risk of maybe losing a lot of readers because they can't follow it all, if that makes sense as a question.
Yeah, no, there is that line, right? And there's a line between image and abstraction too. I mean, you have to have both things. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me that there's some poems that you begin in mystery and you end in clarity, and others the reverse.
We may have lost you a little bit there.
Yeah, she's frozen. We can just cut.
It was a great way to end, though.
I don't know if you can hear us, Marianne, but you've frozen.
You froze at the word clarity.
Let's see. Will she come back? There you are.
No, I was just putting in mind of these three definitions that Wallace Stevens talks about one of his poems, like of poems that, let's see, how does this go? What for them are, it must change. The poem must change. It can't be just, oh, look at the beautiful flower. It's so beautiful. Yes, it's beautiful. Yes, look at the beautiful flower, but something must happen. There has to be some kind of dramatic something. And then, and it must be abstract, which always bothered me since I'm such an imagist. But now I read that as like abstract, meaning it must get bigger at some point. It can't just be, here's my little life and my cool little thoughts. It has to be bigger. Move out of that a bit. However, and that's where it goes, I guess, and oddly enough, like that's where it goes more interior, but it gets bigger somehow and more abstract. And then there's another one. Damn, I can't think of it. Which is my favorite, of course, but my brain is reaching here for it. But anyway, these it's so wonderful to think about that idea that it must change. I mean, that was kind of a huge.
And I'm not sure when you say it must change. Am I right at assuming that doesn't necessarily mean it's a turn in the poem? It might be, or it might just be a metaphorical leap, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-fledged turn. Is that correct?
Oh, well, I guess it comes, the way the sonnet has its volta, the turn, right? That was always crucial. But I think that notion of turn means in the sense that the writer has to be changed by the poem.
Okay.
The writer is a different person at the end of the poem because of what's happened in the poem, what the right, and that you have to be able to feel that, and that's probably part of the enact thing that you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good.
I guess I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. Yeah. I have another question, and Hank, you might also have a question. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately, and maybe again because I've been listening to many of the podcasts from the New Yorker, about the use of pronouns, the use of the pronoun I versus the use of the pronoun we. And it's been sort of, I don't know, would you say a little bit out of vogue to talk about the we? It sort of sounds like the royal we. And we, these days, we're a little reluctant to try to presume we can speak for anyone else. So many of us maybe dart a little bit away from it. But in one of the podcasts, Kevin Young was discussing that and saying sometimes in dark times, we are maybe a little more inclined to need to talk using the we pronoun. So I just am curious about your thoughts, all three of you, on the use of pronouns in poems. can we use the we these days? Can we use all three in a poem? What are our thoughts about that?
Well, I'll start with
good.
Walt Whitman said, "The I is always another." So I started that point. And when I was in graduate school, I wrote a poem in first person. And it was incidentally about Vietnam. And my teacher said that I should not write anything that I don't know about. Mm. And I sent that poem out and it got published really quickly. And I came back and showed it to her and she said, well, maybe I was wrong. But what I learned from that experience is to, you may not know something, but you can come to know something. So you immerse yourself in coming to know that voice that you're writing from. I write a lot of persona poems, and I wasn't convinced that they would work until I was reading one. It was a Vietnam poem again, and at the end of the reading, this Vietnam veteran came up to me and said, asked me when did I do my tour of duty, and did I remember this place or that place or so forth and so on. And so the speaker in the poem was made up. The I was convincing enough that he thought it was me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. And we certainly heard that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I know. I think you have to be of a certain age, I think, and some years behind you before you can really pull off the we very well. Because otherwise, I mean, it feels a little silly to be, at least I felt kind of, that it was not terribly convincing. It felt kind of fake for me to be like holding forth about things as the royal we, like when I was younger.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I can answer this in terms of prose. I mean, I wrote this memoir about my one attempt at that kind of writing. And it's about a hitchhiking trip I took in 1971 to California, where, was not unique. I mean, that's what people were doing. But I just like a 10-day trip, and I wanted to get that down before I went totally senile and couldn't remember it. And so, but what I found was, and my friend Jane Hamilton, refers to memoirs. So I got to referring to it as a memoir. And so, but, the few times I've read from it, like, because usually people, when I get invited to read, they want me to read poems, but sometimes I can sneak in something from the memoir, which is fun to read. But after I would read it, people my age would come up to me and say, "Oh my God, that was my experience." And then I realized that even when I was writing it, I felt like I was writing history in a way, like I was trying to get a generational view, that I could go that far. I could speak for a generation, kind of. And so, in that really crazy time, a very rich time that's either maligned or idealized beyond belief, and so, and how it was for a normal person, just a normal, clueless young person. But I mean, and so now I call it a we-war, because I really think it really does in that way, generalize in a way that I could stand behind, at least my experience of it. But I suppose I'm fooling myself. I'm sure it's still a memoir. But anyway, I mean, that's how I could answer that. But I think it is kind of, one feels, to me, a bit, at least I feel a bit hesitant trying to do that, to speak for a group, because I guess the only group I really feel a part of is lapsed Catholics. which is a pretty well. It's a pretty big group actually, but I'm comfortable claiming that group. But any other group, I've always felt kind of an outsider, And I think the writer, the artist, is an outsider. I mean, it's like you walk into a room and you look around and you find somebody you look into their eyes and you think, well, there's life on that planet, and then you're happy because there's someone, you feel like you have a connection with maybe. So anyway, that's my little non-answer to that question.
No,
it's a good question though, but I think a lot of people just want to kill the I. They don't want to do that. And it's not so much they want to replace it with a we. They don't want the I in there. Somehow the I is. But that's really that through the I is how a reader finds a place in the poem, place to look.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
So.
It's tricky. It's well, thank you both for the answers to that question. I would love to continue talking to both of you guys for the rest of the afternoon. I think we're going to have to call it quits for this program, which I really hate to do. Hank, unless you want to add a question before we head out.
Just my thanks for giving us such a great reading and good discussion today. Our viewers will be uplifted and informed. Thank you. Yeah. And for those of you who are watching, again, we appreciate so much you're tuning in, and please go find their books. Tombolo.com stands ready to order their books for you. And Alsace Valentine is a big supporter of our program. So hope you'll all look for their books through Alsace. And Earl, Marianne, thank you both so much for joining us for the Dalí Poetry Program. We really appreciate it and continue to enjoy your powerful words. So
my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a delight, really. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Best to all of you, and stay safe out there. Thank you.
Same to you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.